Hey everybody, I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Thank you a ton for hanging out with me. I try to remember to say this all the time, but I'm particularly thinking about it today because I was musing about the internet, and how we use our internet time is really an honest reflection of what we really, really, really want to do, because you got this little portal to all of planet Earth, and you can goof around and have fun, play games and listen to music and watch shows or try to strengthen your skill set or your knowledge base on this thing or that thing. And so I understand how much this time is, one, rare for all of you, and two, something that you're being really particular with. And yet, here we are. So it is not lost on me that you have a billion things you could do with your listening time, with your internet time, and you choose to spend some of it hanging out with me, and I will not take that for granted. Thank you very, very, very much. That said, when I was a kid, I would watch movies and shows. I was just enamored with storytelling. Oh, I still am. That isn't worn off. But when I would watch, I was watching as a kid for the heroes. I wanted to see what the heroes would do. And really, I just wanted to see them flex. Just do your cool stuff. Be heroic, be honorable, be virtuous, be absolutely indestructible. I don't want stakes. I don't want risk. I don't want consequences. I just want good to win across the board. But somewhere along the way, I'm watching shows and I start to realize this is boring. Characters who don't have any problems, and they face very low stakes situations where it seems there's never really like an all hope is lost moment like you get in the great stories throughout all of human history. And really, it's just look how awesome the good guys are and how deplorable the bad guys are by our product. But eventually, you're paying attention to stories. I'm paying attention to stories. And you realize that a story is only as good as its stakes. It's only as good as the bad guy. And if the good guys take hits and they have problems, it actually makes everything better and makes you more invested. Just look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe version of Thor and think about how he's evolved. We had that on the other day, and he's this blonde, shirtless 1991 Harlequin romance novel cover model who's a very flat, boring character who doesn't seem to have a ton of problems. But over time, you see him change in terms of how he looks. He loses an eye. He loses his weapon. He loses family members. He screws everything up because of his pride and his lust for revenge. And it costs half of all living things in all of existence their ongoing existence. And then he turns fat and drunk and video game addict to try to cope with all of that stuff, and just absolutely racked with grief and paralyzed by all of that. And then he has to come back from that stuff. You get this. I know you do. And I'm saying things that are intuitively already true to you. But the character who is set against the backdrop of a story with very high stakes, and the character who undergoes or feels the pain of those stakes and takes hits as things move along, that is the interesting story. And if there are no stakes, there's no reason for the story. There's no point to even do the exercise. Likewise with the Bible in general. If there are no stakes to life, there's no reason to do the Bible, God, religion, any of this stuff. But, and I think we can agree on this, whether you're a person who's coming from a perspective of more agnosticism or atheism, or a person coming from a position of great belief, there's a reason people keep signing up for religions. Even in the 400 years since the scientific method has defined most of what we understand to be truth, there's a reason people keep signing up. And the reason is stakes. The reason is time and death and loss and failure and all of the things that hurt in life tell us that we are a part of a story where some kind of bad guy, either one with personality or just the abstract nature of evil, is at work and stuff is breaking down. And you try to find answers or make some kind of sense of that. And look, I don't agree with most of the conclusions that most people come to regarding religious stuff, but I do agree with the starting premise that most people have as they go looking for religious answers, and that is we have a problem here. Something is off. There's something beautiful and transcendent about this, but there are stakes, there's risk, there's injury, there's hurt, and the Bible is fully in keeping with this. The Christian understanding of the world is fully in keeping with this. So if you go through the Bible and sanitize it of all risk, if, like I did when I was a kid, you metaphorically watch the parts of the Bible where the stakes are raised and where bad things happen through your fingers and watch the part where the heroes do well and behave well with eyes wide open, you really do miss the point. Not just the point of the story in terms of how the plot unfolds, but the whole premise of the story, the whole necessity for the document and the whole activity of religion in the first place is missed if you skip those stakes. The reality is there is a very real threat to existence. There's a very real threat to each and every individual. And the plot of the Bible, whether you think there's a God behind it or not, is the God character looks upon a situation where damage has been introduced and the stakes have become very high. Death is in play. Failure of this entire creative project is in play. And that God character, rather than saying, well, they screwed that up, I'm just going to do another one, see if it works out better, the God character instead embarks on this lengthy redemptive process to fix it. And he does so with increasing investment on his part, or so it appears from the human perspective, ultimately getting to a place where he sends his own son, that's Jesus, who we're reading about in the book of Matthew, to go and resolve the situation. As we get about halfway through Matthew, it starts looking like Jesus is hinting that the way he is going to address this very high stakes game, the way he is going to defeat what needs to be defeated and bring victory to the side of what is good, is at the expense of his own life. So then along comes Peter after acknowledging Jesus as the Christ in Matthew 16. Well, I'll just read it to you because I have it right here and it's in the Bible. Matthew 16:21. It says, "From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem, okay, and to suffer many things." Ooh, that raises the stakes. I'm going to read this through my fingers. "At the hands of the elders, chief priests, and teachers of the law, and that he, I'm really reading through my fingers, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life." Okay, well, the last part's good. But then it says in verse 22, "Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. 'Never, Lord,' he said, 'that shall never happen to you.' But Jesus turned and said to Peter," and this is some vigorous language, "Get behind me, Satan. You're a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men." Whoa! That is scorching. But also, I never want to do the thing where we just pile on Peter and treat him like an idiot. I am empathetic to Peter because he does very human things that look a lot like the very human things that I would do in that situation and that I do in much lower stakes situations in my life as it actually is. He's going to go and try and talk his friend out of it and be like, "No, I've got your back. You can count on me." But Jesus is having none of it. You'll notice that Jesus' response is not like, "Look, buddy, that's misguided. I know you don't understand how this is all going to work out right now, but I need you to just trust me and roll with me. And I also need you to hear me on this. The situation is under control." No, there's not even an explaining or a patience with Jesus on this point. He instead says, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me." Jesus has said something like that to somebody before here in the book of Matthew, and that is to Satan, because he had one other interaction with Satan, and that's in Matthew chapter 4, when he goes out in the desert and he's led out in the desert intentionally by the Holy Spirit, and he runs into Satan out there, and Satan gives him 3 of these temptations. And what do all the temptations have in common? They all prompt Jesus to effectively renounce his relationship with and dependence on and adherence to the plan of his Father, and instead to go it on his own and point out to everybody how awesome and how great he is, which would result in the victory of evil. Those high stakes would go from being high stakes to being a straight up W for the forces of destructiveness and evil, and God would lose. So after we get through those 3 tests in Matthew chapter 4, you recall that last one is up on this high mountain place, and it's like Simba and Mufasa, and he's like, "Look at all of this stuff, just worship me and I'll give you all of this." And Jesus says, "Away from me, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Okay, flipping back over here to Matthew 16. Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan." Coincidence? I think not. In both situations, the play is the same. One is malicious from Satan himself. It's like, "I'm going right through the front door. I'm going to take a big swing before you ever get any momentum. Let's just see if I can conquer God through clever negotiation and trickery." But here in Matthew 16, I don't think this is malicious from Peter, but it's almost like a 4th temptation of Christ that's unintentional, where Peter's like, "Don't go through an excruciating death and a rejection by all men." And it's easy to imagine Jesus as being just invulnerable to that kind of temptation because he's God and he doesn't make mistakes. But if he was all God and all man, I mean, come on, think about how much energy you throw into not being dead. I don't think it was Jesus' greatest excitement to get executed on a cross. I think he was obedient to this plan. I think he was obedient to death, and that's the way the Bible holds it out. So I think this is a 4th temptation of Christ, And again, here, I think the point is Peter is looking at the situation like kid me looked at stories, and maybe sometimes even like adult me looks at stories. And that is, just give me the rosy, good outcome. We're not going to tolerate the bad guy making any headway or progress. We're not going to tolerate stakes. We're going to snuff that stuff out. It demonstrates a misunderstanding of the whole redemptive plan of God, who Jesus is and what he has to do. It demonstrates that Peter doesn't understand what the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God, things he just attributed to Jesus rightly. It means he doesn't understand what those things mean. They're words that he a little bit gets, but the full implications of how Jesus is the fulfillment and the completion of how this whole story has been unfolding since the very first page back here, that still escapes Peter. And I don't blame him for it, because I've put my entire life into trying to think about it. I've had the luxury of a neat, tidy, bound up Bible in front of me for my whole life, and it's still really hard to figure out. Jesus' collision course with the cross is not the fun part of the story. It's the part that you watch through your fingers because he's so good and innocent and right, and the last thing you want is to see him get unjustly executed. But as Peter doesn't understand, and as we only understand because of the benefit of hindsight, this had to happen. This was the redemptive plan all along. Hey, quick reminder, we are still doing our best to connect people with africarenewal.org/TMBH. Africa Renewal is doing a thing where for $40 a month, you can sponsor a child in Uganda and change their world. Again, africarenewal.org/TMBH. You can go there, learn more about how it works, and see really how brilliantly and efficiently this is designed to make your money go for miles and miles and miles in somebody else's life in a different part of the world and in a different economy where a few bucks makes a world of difference. Thanks for considering that. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. I appreciate you. Let's do this again soon.